Tony Smith, ET, here with you as we continue along on a Thursday here on Jaguars Today. Mike Dempsey on assignment for a couple more days, today and tomorrow. He'll be back in with us on Monday as we all get ready to say goodbye to ET here on Jaguars Today. He'll be moving to the full-time shift in the morning, and he'll still be around the station, so it's not like I'm not going to have you around in my life, E.
Oh, we're going to be here.
But you won't be.
Especially now that I know a little bit more about baseball. I'm going to be at your chest.
Well, you know, the Braves and Marlins have a series this weekend.
Oh, you think I don't know that?
Yeah, we'll get into that maybe a little bit on Monday on the show. Right now, though, we're going to be joined by Johnny Ozone, John Oesher, the Jaguars.com senior writer. Johnny, haven't talked to you in a while. How are you, bud?
That's the end of an era, ET, right? I mean, that's how long has he been on Jaguars Today? At least 5, right?
Yeah, this year, November 5th, will be 5 years.
Oh, Lee, that's 5 years already.
It was close to that.
Yeah.
If I was on the show more, I'd say you'd be missed, ET, but since I'm not there.
Dang, Johnny O.
How is the time between the Jaguars offseason wrapping up a few weeks ago and training camp treating you, Johnny O?
Well, I'm in the last probably, I hope, day or two of COVID, so not that great. But beyond that, it's been fine. It's a relatively slow off season, as you guys know. You guys follow as much as I do. Really, people just waiting on Ingram and Robinson and talking about the stadium, which on all those topics, not a whole lot of new ground except to sort of wait, right?
Sure. I read the piece that you had up on Jaguars.com yesterday where you were asking a panel of 8 people what the most trusted position group for the team is heading into the year. No surprise that wide receiver was the overwhelming pick. How might this year's wide receiver room, Johnny, which has the mystery of Calvin Ridley in it, obviously, compared to the best wide receiver rooms that you've seen in your time covering the league? You got to watch Jimmy and Keenan when they were together here. You saw those groups with Marvin Harrison up in Indianapolis for a number of years. How do you think this group could compare with those groups that you've already seen?
Yeah, first of all, to clarify, the question was outside quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most trusted position? Because it was pretty unanimous for wide receiver. I think had I asked about quarterback in that, I think it would have it would have leaned a lot toward Trevor as well. But,
sure.
How does this compare? I mean, it's the one thing I would say is I felt like the first 2 receivers groups I covered, I probably didn't know what I was seeing when I was actually watching them. Meaning, in my opinion, Jimmy and even Keenan, these are all-time guys. When Keenan retired, he was in the top 20 of all-time catches. Jimmy the same way. I feel like Jimmy's a Hall of Famer, and Keenan's not that far off. So, Reggie and Marvin, obviously, I think Reggie's going to go to the Hall of Fame, and Marvin's already in. So those are 2. It's tough to compare. But depth with this group, meaning you've got Ridley, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk, plus Evan Ingram into that, who he's a tight end, but he's more, he's in that receiver core. Sort of a couple of Colt teams that put up 1,000 yards with 3 different guys. I'm thinking of Stokely, Reggie, and Marvin Harrison in 2004 were unbelievable. I can't compare it to that because I haven't seen this group do it yet. And they've got to get continuity with Trevor. Ridley's got to fit in. But that element of Ridley, I mean, I know you guys have talked about it. When you've got a guy who can be a 1 and draw coverage, which is what guys like Jimmy Smith and Marvin Harrison, when I covered him, defenses had to account for those guys or you lost the game, right? I mean, like, if you didn't double them in certain situations, they were going to beat you and you were going to walk off the field a loser. That's a powerful thing at wide receiver because it dictates defenses. And Ridley might be that guy. And if he is, then this group's up there.
John, I know you've also had the opportunity to cover teams that had legitimate championship expectations going into a year, right? It's not like every team doesn't feel like they can win during the offseason and get better and do those kind of things. But there's a difference between, that typical NFL we're going to win and the teams that have those expectations placed on them. And Jacksonville certainly feels like one of those this year. What have your impressions of this Jaguars team been when you've had the opportunity to be around them as far as dealing with those expectations so far this offseason?
Yeah, it's a little tricky because I'm not sure those really start showing themselves until you get into pads, until you get closer to the season. Right now, everybody talks, if you follow me.
Yeah.
But I know what you're asking, obviously. I think the biggest thing, especially, I started covering the Colts in 01. And, to me, that's when my experience with covering great quarterbacks with Peyton, being involved with the Brady-Manning rivalry, seeing guys like Aaron Rodgers, et cetera, on these great teams in this day and age, maybe even more so than when the Jaguars were good in the 90s, it's about the confidence and how the quarterback carries himself. He dictates so much, and so much is based on how that guy plays. In that respect, Trevor's got that thing, that thing that makes you believe that you can go win it with. The confidence, the demeanor, the ability, we saw it against the Chargers. When you can have an awful first half and still go win the game, that's a big belief chip for other players. I don't know what more adversity he's going to face.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly he can do that. And that, I think, gives them, that thing that the Chiefs have, that thing that the Bengals have, where every player who's in the game and every coach, you truly never feel like you're out of it. You're always in it. Every team sort of feels that way. But after the way they ended last season, coming back 5 times, this team's got that. And I think when you're talented, have the quarterback, and always believe in yourselves, you got a chance. So I do think they carry themselves that way. Now they have to figure out, okay, they were good last year, but you guys saw as many games as I did. They were playing on a thin line.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to be more consistent and not have to come back from double digits every game, or else things could still fall apart.
Jaguars.com. Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
Yeah, no. To me, consistency is the key in that regard. You can't live on that fine line every year.
Yeah, you can't just live on the prayer, week to week, which
right.
They had to do a lot kind of going through last year. Jaguars.com senior writer John Oesher joining us here on Jaguars Today. We are less than a month away now from the start of training camp for the team. What are the biggest storylines in your mind as we head into training camp next month?
Well, in my mind, I think it's how the defense comes together. I'm not sure, I know fans are still waiting for that big move at pass rush. I don't know if that's coming or not. But I think their consistency pass rush, can they complement this offense? And, if they're not a little better rushing the passer, can they maintain that unbelievable turnover pace they had last year? That was maybe the most underrated part of this team. Despite on paper and in feel not feeling like a, quote, dominant defense, the team was, I think, 3rd or 4th in the NFL in forcing turnovers. You hope that is something that can be a trend, because if it's not, then all of a sudden some of those games last year go the other way. So I think pass rush is key to that. So no matter how they address it, I think pass rush is a huge storyline. Calvin Ridley, how he indeed fits in. After seeing him in OTAs, I can't imagine he's not going to be just a standout. But he's still got to do it. And then obviously Cam and Evan, until we find out the end game on those stories, then there'll be storylines until they're not. I obviously anticipate those being solved before training camp starts.
Had John Shipley in studio with me on Tuesday, Johnny O, and he was the first one that I've heard from, the group that covers the team, is down there around it every day, that said, I don't think they're going to sign a veteran edge rusher when everything is said. It's the first time I've heard someone say they don't think it's going to happen for this football team. Has your feeling about the likelihood of them signing one of these veteran edge guys changed over the course of the last month and a half, basically, that we've been discussing it heavily, basically every day?
Not really, because I never felt like it it was an urgency for them. For people observing it, I did. But you never got the vibe from talking to the team like they were desperate to do it. I kind of agree with Skip. I'm not sure they do it. I've said all along, I thought they were monitoring it. I thought if the market played out, like just throw a name out there, say they were interested in Yannick Ngakoue. I'm not sure if they are or aren't. But, I think they know a price they want to pay. Yannick's camp certainly has a price that he wants to pay. I think had those gotten closer, perhaps they would have made a move. But I thought that was always going to be an element of it. And once they sort of figured out early in the offseason where all those prices were, I'm not just saying Yannick, probably 4 or 5 of those guys.
Yeah.
They had an idea what they wanted to pay. And then once they sort of saw that market, I think they sort of said, well, if one of these guys comes around, then we'll sign him. If not, then we're okay with Trayvon and with Josh Allen. So I agree with Skip. I wouldn't shock me if something happened, but I'd be a little surprised at this point if they do something before training camp.
Who would you guess will be the most improved player from last season to this season for this team?
Hadn't really thought about it. So let me go with something unique. I'm not sure if he'll be most improved, but I think he'll be dramatically improved. I like what I'm hearing about Travis Etienne. As good as he was last year, and I've written this a few times. The reason I say that is I talked to Rauscher and Peterson about this late in OTAs. They really think that he's going to benefit tremendously from his first year, be a better, smarter runner. And they didn't say he was a dumb runner last year, but there are certainly NFL things, the way you have to run in the NFL, setting up blockers, et cetera, that they feel like he's going to be better at. Every time I talk to Doug or Rauscher about this, and even Bernie Parmalee, they really think that these guys, that Etienne is going to have a huge edge just from being a more experienced running back. So he was good last year, so it won't shock people. But you talk about that Trevor second-year leap, there's a little bit of a feeling that Travis can take that too.
Fred Taylor's Hall of Fame candidacy is discussed from time to time, obviously, but more in the last couple of days, D-Rock put the story up where he had the chance to sit down and talk to Fred about it, as well as, people from around the league, people that are going to be involved in the voting process. What conversations have you had with people over the last several years regarding Fred Taylor's candidacy, and how good do you think his argument to get into the Hall of Fame ultimately is?
Well, I think a lot of people who were involved with the Jaguars were sort of maybe overly focused on Baselli for a lot of years because it felt close. So you talk that when you go to Super Bowls, you're talking about Tony to people because that's the one that's so close. And then at the end of the conversation, you go, hey, for some reason, Fred's not getting any traction. What's going on? And there's definitely a feeling that, among the people who talk about it for the Jags, which is, sort of me and Frisco and guys like that at the Super Bowl, that the inertia is happening. And I hope Mike's story is sort of the push for that. I know Fred has a platform, and he uses it very well for that. The things that you hear are always sort of what you heard about Tony, too. Of, oh, well, really? Is he? A lot of guys don't think about them that way for whatever reason. But I've always thought this with Fred. He's close to getting in the room, and he's close to being a finalist. He's been a semifinalist, I think, 3 straight years or 4. Once he gets in the room, and I think he will, I think what's going to happen is these voters, a lot of young voters who maybe didn't see him that much, are going to go back and watch him. With Tony, when you went back and studied it, all of a sudden you had people saying, hey, he was the best in the league for 4 or 5 years. And that had great sway. Well, with running back, you've got clear highlights. I think voters are going to put on the highlight tape of Fred and realize that this was a LaDainian Tomlinson, whoever the highlight guys were back then, that he was as good as any of them. So I think, whereas an offensive lineman, you had to sort of talk it and talk to people who played. I think voters are going to put on the tape of Fred, and as you know, Tony, when you see his highlight film,
Yeah.
there's only been a few human beings all time who could do the things he did. I think that dazzle and pop will start getting him a lot of votes. And then they'll go back and do the same thing they did with Tony, which is talk to people who played against him, do the heavy research. And you're going to have a lot of defenders say, hey, when we played the Jags, that's too scary. And that holds a lot of weight in the room.
No doubt. I've felt the same way about it since it became a big topic of discussion, especially after last year when Tony finally got in, right?
Yeah.
So when's it going to be time for Fred? And I felt basically what you just laid out. I think at some point he's going to get in the room. I don't know how easy or difficult that process is going to be for Fred to be the guy being discussed in the room among those final 10. But I think when he gets to that point, it's going to happen for him because he's special. And it's hard to explain that special without them having to sit down and really look at it. But once he gets in that final 10, I think it's a pretty easy case to be made. It's just hard to get him to that point.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, I think a lot of fans who follow it, I feel like a lot of Jaguars fans hardcore now understand the process more because they sort of lived it with Tony. It's not a perfect process. I think it's the best process because these guys who vote on it really care about it. But you sort of are an unknown, even to the voters in a lot of cases, until they're forced to start studying those final 15 or 10 guys, whatever that number is that gets in the room, 15. So once they get there, then they put a lot of time during this time of year. They call people. I've been around voters. I've seen them. They will call a lot of people, try to figure out who these best guys were. They take it very seriously. Once you start that process with Fred, I think it'll bode well for him.
I'm with you, Johnny. Appreciate the time this morning, bud. I'm sure we'll see you out at Jaguars training camp here in about a month.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, man. Fight the COVID.